So that is Mike Conley, who Mike Conley has deteriorated as a player. There's no doubt. He's declining. He's 34 years old, I think, 34 years old. Let's not pretend as if Mike Conley is some kind of bad NBA player these days. So he averaged 13 points, 5 assists, and shot 40% from 3 last season on 5.8 attempts per game. That's really good numbers. Now, is he a starting caliber point guard on a contending team these days? No. Could he be one of the best 6 men in the league? Absolutely. Would he be happy with going to a role like that? I don't know. Would a team be happy to pay him currently $20+ million in each of the next 2 seasons to be a bench player and play 20, 25 minutes a game? Who knows? But to me, Mike Conley has still got a lot left to give, and he can be a difference maker for a contending team. I don't see him as a starting point guard on a contending team anymore, but those contending teams don't necessarily need that. Unless, the only one I can think of is Dallas. Maybe Dallas have him in a starting role. But even then, I'd probably just start Dinwiddie and have Conley coming off the bench, if I'm being honest. But in a 6th-man role off the bench, Conley can be a difference maker. And the team that I think he would be perfect for is the Phoenix Suns. So you have Chris Paul, who, there's question marks there, but I think Chris Paul had a good enough regular season, was an all-star, led the league in assists. I think he was good enough in the regular season to not excuse, but not be overly concerned with how he finished the playoffs. Yes, it was incredibly disappointing, but so was his the end of his finals run in 2021, and he came back and was an all-star last season, as I said, led the league in scoring. So I'm not overly concerned about Chris Paul just yet. Now, that's going to come at some point pretty soon. Not quite yet. He's my starting point guard, no worries. Cam Payne's more of a worry for me. I just never been a fan of Cam Payne. He had an excellent playoff run when the Suns made the finals last year. Was disappointing this season. Wasn't great in the regular season. And then come playoff time, he got played out of the rotation because he was that poor. And Monty Williams was going with... When Paul was on the bench, Monty Williams was going with Devin Booker and Landry Shamet, neither of which are point guards. Devin Booker is a starting 2 guard, and Landry Shamet is a shooter. Neither of those. Now, Booker, I think, is developing his playmaking stuff. We saw when Paul was out, he did some great stuff, playmaking-wise, but he's not that yet. And ideally, if Cam Payne was in any kind of form, he plays next to Booker. You could almost play Shamet as a small forward in some small lineups as an extra shooter. But regardless, they just need to work out the Cam Payne situation. And even outside of Cam Payne, you look at their roster right now, they don't have another point guard behind Cam Payne. So even in addition to Payne, you need another point guard. And to me, Mike Conley would be the perfect player to bring in for the Utah Jazz. And from the Utah Jazz for the Phoenix Suns. And it's pretty comfortable for them to get to his salary. Maybe Shamet is included in the deal. Maybe Payne's included in the deal, although I'd probably just push Payne back to my 3rd-string point guard. Given the aging and injury issues to Paul and Conley, I'd probably keep Payne around. But Shamet and Dario Saric making a combined pretty much $20 million. That's right on what Conley's going to make. Obviously, you'd probably have to throw a 1st-round pick in there. I just think that's a pretty easy deal to get done. And even though I'm paying Conley $20 million to be a bench player, I just think that is a perfect fit. I think he's capable of playing alongside Paul and Booker in lineups. I think his defensive capacity is still good enough to be able to be involved in that kind of stuff. He's a good off-the-ball player. He's not necessarily a traditional point guard that needs the ball in his hands. He can catch and shoot. So I think he's a great fit. And then you're looking at these other Utah players. Jordan Clarkson, 6th man of the year last year. I think he's a cinch to be moved this offseason. To me, he's a player that is the icing on a cake. He's not someone you're going to rebuild around. I mean, you could technically, if you're Utah, if you got stuck with Jordan Clarkson, you'd probably send him out there and just say, chuck shots. Because they're not in the business of winning next season. Just chuck shots, Jordan Clarkson. He might average 25 a game, but you're probably doing a 30% field goal percentage. That's probably fine, because it means they're losing games. But I do think that he's going to get moved. his value to me is interesting. I have question marks on his offensive efficiency and the defensive capacity, but there's no doubt he's a spark plug off the bench that can give you 15, 16 points on a nightly basis and be a productive, helpful player in a playoff rotation. And that to me is, if you look at someone like Phoenix and some of these other teams during the playoffs, they lacked playoff guys. And even the Celtics, and we've seen them fix that with Malcolm Brogdon and Gallinari to an extent this offseason. They got down to basically their starting five plus some minutes from Derek White and guys like Grant Williams and Payton Pritchard. You just didn't want out there. So the more playoff guys you can have in your rotation, the better. And I think Clarkson is still one of those kind of guys that you'd want in that mix. Bogdanovic is another player. Bojan Bogdanovic is a player who is pretty underrated. He's aging a bit. He's 33 years old. Again, defensively, there's question marks. But he's a guy who, again, shoots 40% from three. One of the best catch-and-shoot players in the league. So an elite three-point shooter who's also capable of doing some stuff himself off the dribble. He's basically averaged 18 to 20 points, almost on his career, but at least for his few years in Utah. So, again, he's a player. Interested to see where Utah sees value. I think he'd be a great fit. Again, is it in a starting role? Probably. If you need a wing, then that's probably who you can look at. Again, would you want to pay him? I think he's on about $19 million. Would you want to pay him that sort of money to be a bench player? You could. And again, bench players these days, you can be a six-man and play 30 minutes a night. So that could be an option for a contending team.